explosives and blew himself up as they approached the decomposing animal. SSG Kyle, a military member, was injured in the blast. An additional soldier observed the enemy's path and fired at them. First aid is administered to SSG Kyle, and the men are taken back to the barracks. SSG Kyle starts telling his story to his lieutenant about his soldier veteran grandfather. Back in the year 1993, Grandpa Bud, a former soldier in World War II, and Kyle's granddad and his relatives are in the grandparents' home playing with the 13-year-old Kyle. A sudden appearance from Grandma Betty reveals freshly made cookies. When Kyle's female cousin Ruthie asked for cookies, he told her they couldn't have them until they earned them via their play. Grandpa Bud explains to the kids that in order to receive a prize, they must be outdoors having fun instead of competing with one another. It's not fun to play with kids, another male relative of Grandpa. It's time for 45 minutes of hiding and seeking, and whoever wins gets a few cookies. Kids then agree. His grandkids are being taught in an old-fashioned manner by their grandfather to prevent getting spoiled. His hands are tapped by Grandma Betty, who tells him he must kiss her in order to get his treats. He requested Grandma to get him a lemonade before she left, but Grandma showed him that he already had one on his side table. Grandpa Bud's memory loss is already apparent. Meanwhile, the kids are having fun in their grandparents' barn. Kyle found an old trunk inside the barn. While opening it, Kyle came out with a few items for Grandpa Bud, including an antique pistol and some letters from his time serving in the military during World War II. When his other cousins discovered him in the barn, they took the trunk to their grandfather and showed it to him. When Kyle approaches Grandpa Bud, Betty advises him not to expose the trunk to his grandpa because he would be upset. Kyle, on the other hand, Kyle was determined to show his grandfather the trunk. Upon finding Kyle with the trunk, Grandpa Bud is infuriated and demands Kyle to return the items that don't belong to him. A Memorial Day remembrance from Kyle to his grandpa goes over well. Bud and Kyle's chat is being heard by Grandma Betty and other children who are peeking from the inside window. Kyle was the first to go for the gun and take it out of the leather case. Listening intently, Bud tells Kyle the backstory. His weapon of choice was a rifle from their greatest airborne assault on Holland in 1944. Bud recalls that it seemed like they were on a suicide mission and that they were being transported by an army pickup vehicle. For Bud to have a cigarette, he asks his friend to puff. When a truck came up in front of Bud's troops, the soldiers were conversing. The lieutenant yelled that they were Germans, and everyone believed him. They begin firing at each other. The lieutenant verified the German's passport and then went with the men, leaving the German to die. Bud snatches the soldier's pistol and has kept it ever since. Kyle hears more of the tale from Grandpa Bud. He stated he used to assume that people and animals were indistinguishable from one another. Nevertheless, while drinking his lemonade, Grandpa agrees with this statement and informs Kyle that both are different by killing from a distance. On the other hand, Grandma Betty got a phone call from Justin's parents requesting that Justin come home to help with household duties. As for the story's influence on Kyle, he was briefly dazed. Grandpa Bud invites him over to the trunk and asks him to choose something inside. When Bud informs Kyle that he picked the stone off his rear, Kyle tosses it. Bud's story begins while they are preparing to launch the strikes on Christmas Day in Germany. Other soldiers are digging a hole to conceal and install explosives for the enemy as Bud and his men protect the barracks and keep an eye on the enemy. When the lieutenant places them in their positions, it begins to snow. Bud's pal Califano is holding a rosary with a rifle in his hand. Califano locates the enemy with the use of his binoculars. As soon as he asks for help, the Germans and the Americans begin shooting. Bud and his men will not stop until they are within striking distance of the invading forces. Califano recalls tossing the rosary with the grenade as he gets near to the enemy. He grabbed the rosary as soon as he saw it. A pistol is pointed at him by an enemy. In the end, he is saved by the lieutenant, who stands by his side and helps him take out the enemies. A bullet strikes Califano, leaving him injured. Because of Califano's wound, they instantly stop going ahead. A rescue team arrives and whisks him away for first aid. When Kyle returned to their storytelling session with Grandpa Bud, he had completed his lemonade and was ready for another glass. So, he stepped inside, and Kyle accompanied him. Ruthie walks in on Grandma Betty pouring lemonade into a glass and accidentally knocks the vase over. Her grandfather chastises Ruthie for being reckless. Bud is soothed by Grandma Betty and is soon on his way. Meanwhile, SSG Kyle's vital signs are being monitored by the nurse. For relief, he takes a dose of painkiller medication. A water bottle in SSG Kyle's hands brings back memories of his time as an ISF recruiter. He was dealing with recruiting several ISF candidates when a nasty migraine hit him. A pain reliever was given to him by a colleague. A guard dog suddenly notices something weird going on among the hundreds of applicants. With Arabic markings on the paper, an out-of-place guy stands out among the rest of them. The dog won't stop barking at the stranger, and he's unable to control himself. Suddenly, Kyle yells to the soldiers to get down, and an explosion throws Kyle from the impact. The incident was begun by a guy disguised as an ISF candidate. Terrorists surround them. In order to bring down the terrorists in the area, SSG Kyle and his crew will have to go to those locations. They had vacated the area, but when they went back to investigate, they found a large number of uniformed personnel dead, including the one who had given her the medication. In contrast, the narrative of Grandpa Bud and Kyle continues. In the trunk, Kyle reaches for another thing and discovers a collection of pictures. During his search, he came upon an old photograph of Bud and his friend Jack O'Hara shot at Camp Mackle just before they embarked on another mission to England. In spite of Grandpa Bud's reluctance, Kyle persists in his desire to know more about the photograph. When Grandpa recalls sending a letter to a friend in Germany in 1945, he breaks down in tears. Bud, Califano, and Jack went to a German-populated church for liturgy. In preparation for an enemy attack, they dug holes for their positions in the field the following day. After a few hours, Jack ordered the men to launch a new jungle attack. They saw a group of German troops approaching from the other side of the river. They opened fire on the attackers and began to take them down one by one. Troops rushed Califano to a neighboring church, where he was given some medical attention. The injury to his limb necessitates amputation. A bullet pierces Bud's neck as he answers Jack's question about his buddy, and he dies instantly. Bud is determined to identify and murder the German soldier who killed his companion, and he succeeds in spotting him. When he saw that it was still a kid, he grew cautious. Early German soldier willing to murder at a very young age, aged only 13. As soon as Kyle hears these stories, Grandpa Bud breaks down in tears. He was unable to bear the memories he had shared with his friends. Kyle soothed his grandfather by hugging him tightly and caressing him on the head. Upon seeing Grandpa's tears, Grandma Betty and Ruthie were moved to tears upon seeing Grandpa's tears. A sumptuous meal with the grandparents is being enjoyed by Kyle, Ruthie, James, and the rest of the family at lunch. Despite the fact that Grandma Betty had asked everyone to say a prayer before they began eating, Grandpa couldn't stop himself from digging in as soon as the meal started. Everyone is welcome to stay for a thank you note from Grandma after the prayer. After lunch, Kyle and Grandpa put the trunk back where it was, but they stopped sharing stories. Later that night, Kyle returned the trunk to the barn with the rest of the items. A shard of glass shattered and slashed Kyle's fingertips. A souvenir glass was all that he took with him as he left the barn. Kyle ate dessert on the patio while getting some fresh air with Grandpa Bud. Kyle's grandpa begins speaking in German, and Kyle can't understand what he's saying. Kyle's father shows up unannounced at his grandparents' home with a shirt for his son, who is shocked. They're being taken home since it's becoming late. Kyle was appreciated by his grandparents, Grandpa Bud and Grandma Betty, for his time spent with them. After saying goodbye, Grandpa gave Kyle the rosary that had belonged to his old buddy. At present, Kyle continues to tell the nurse in the barracks all of these stories at this time. It was also shown to the nurse, and Kyle continues to carry the grandpa's rosary. In order to recover from his injuries, the nurse put Kyle to bed for the night. After a good night's sleep the next day, SSG Kyle was ready to go when the nurse questioned him. To go to his barracks, SSG Kyle is being taken by helicopter. A group of his troops greets him and begins planning an operation for a notorious terrorist. They're going for Al-Qaeda members. Armed forces are then released to continue their work. The soldiers are dispatched to the assignment later that night. A journey into the bush is underway. Kyle was able to see masked intruders via the scope of his night vision goggles. A civilian was struck by mistake. A soldier takes the civilian's gun as a souvenir and presents it to Kyle as if on cue. He recalls the story of his grandfather. Kyle turned down the offer and told him to return the pistol to its owner. In pursuit of their goals, the soldiers aren't stopping. On the next day, they returned to their barracks the next day, and SSG Kyle returned. Kyle began throwing up and getting a headache again. This is a terrible sign for him. After then, Kyle recalled his choice to murder and attack people throughout the mission. After Kyle's platoon commander came, he instantly accepted full responsibility for the accident. Kyle, on the other hand, got a different message. An envelope from the Red Cross informed him that his grandfather, Bud, had already passed away. Nevertheless, Kyle is still in the field and will be unable to attend the funeral. Despite this, Kyle and the rest of the men are still in their barracks waiting for their journey to return to their homes. Kyle has a headache while watching the news on TV. SSG Kyle and the rest of his squad are dozing off aboard the military plane they were transported in.